Our great and awesome God, we are so grateful that you provide us with everything that we need spiritually and that you alleviate our spiritual burdens. We thank you for loving us and caring for us, and we thank you for wanting to have a relationship with us and wanting us to be in your presence continually. And we're so grateful for that. We're thankful for Jesus who made it all possible. We pray that you'll be with us as we study the importance of hospitality as it relates to edification, that we will have open hearts and open minds, and that we will take what we learn and apply it to our lives so that we can help one another get to heaven and build one another up. Through Jesus we pray, amen. All right, so before we begin our lesson, I have to ask you this question. Who has completed their edification profile? All right, Chloe sent hers to us. Chloe's is the only one that we've received so far. Okay, so I knew that she had done hers. I have not looked at everybody's directory yet, but I did look through a few and I didn't see any other ones done. So we really want you to do that so that we would know how to better edify you and you'll know how to better edify one another. If you are having a hard time getting that entered into the directory online, I know the directory online, you can change your address. You can change your phone number. You can upload a picture if you want to. So there's a lot that you can do. I'm not sure that you can do your own edification profile. There's a comment section. So if you have any problems with that, just email it to Brian or myself, and we will make sure it gets in there under your name. Because you could do it not only for there's one that's family, but there's an individual one for each person. So there's a comment section for each person. Brian encouraged you to do that not only for yourself, but also for your kids as well, so that we have some ideas on how to edify one another. I think it will be helpful to us as we go forward, getting to know one another better. Because I think, and we probably all experience this, the more we get to know one another and the more we find out interesting things about one another, the more we have things to talk about and the more connections we can make, and that builds us up, right? We find out you have connections with people and you get to talk about things that you enjoy together. That does have a way of building our relationship, making it stronger and building one another up. So we turn our attention to hospitality. I just start out by asking you, what are some memories you have, maybe back to childhood, of people being hospitable to you or your family being hospitable? And Matt raises his hand right away, so bring a microphone to Matt. He has one. If you have one that you just like to share with us briefly, that would be helpful to us. All right, Matt?
We grew up traveling a lot, driving all over the country and worshiping at different congregations. And I remember on more than one occasion that we would be invited out to lunch or to someone's house that we just met, and it was like we hadn't just met them.
Yeah, great.
They were Christians.
You're traveling around, you're Christians, you have this connection together, and when it's over, people invite you. You're from Florida, you might be out in the West somewhere, wherever you're vacationing, and they say, hey, come on over to our house or come out to eat with us. That is a great way to edify or build someone up, is by inviting them over to your house for a Sunday lunch or inviting them out to a restaurant. That's a very helpful thing. All right, where else is that microphone? All right.
Yeah, so when I was in college, I attended at Glen Springs Road Church of Christ, and one of the families there invited me to go out after church one evening and just look at Christmas lights around. Okay. And as a young college student, that meant a lot to me to spend time with that family, get to know them a little bit better. And I just experienced that. Then in Tallahassee, when I was working at Centerville Road, they would also have a family that would invite a lot of people over, and that always meant so much to me as well. Still being young single at that point in my life meant a lot. And then when I was traveling around for business, it's kind of the same thing. Like people that the different churches that I would go to would either specifically pray for me in their prayers or invite me. So that also was something that, again, being young, meant a whole lot to me at those points and times in my life, and was definitely edifying.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things there. Those all great examples. One point that we can pull from that, sometimes there are times in our life where we need that more than others, right? When you're young, you don't have a family, you don't have places to go. To have that association with a spiritual family can be even more important at that time. I remember after I left college and went to Texas, and Shelly was not there yet. We had not been married yet. There was a couple that had me over every single Thursday night. That was just my standing invitation for dinner. Every Thursday night we come, we play foosball, and they were not spinners, and I like to spin at the foosball table. So we had all kinds of foosball competitions. It was just a good experience, right, to bring up to help us. All right, all right, Joy, and then Brian.
My parents were some of the most hospitable people I've ever known. I grew up constantly with people being invited over to our home. They were always having college students over for meals, people from the congregation. And I remember my mother telling me when I was very young, I made the complaint to them that all we ever did was visit old people and sick people. And so they started trying to, take me to the park and things. But throughout the years, we always had people in our home. And I've never known anyone more hospitable than my parents.
And it made an impression on you as a young child. I mean, it makes an impression on young kids when their parents have people over and their parents are being hospitable. Anna has one over here. And, even like having the meeting preacher over for dinner or having him stay at your house, those are memories that not only are just good memories, but they shape our lives, right? They at an early age, they shape the way that we think about associating with other Christians. I think those are important things. A couple more. Brian, and then Anna, and then Daniel, then Jenna, and that's it.
Yeah, it definitely shaped my life because not growing up in a Christian household, friends of mine in elementary school, even in the middle school, their parents would often have me over with their kids. I was friends with their kids, and I just appreciated that. They didn't say, "Oh, well, he's not a Christian, so I don't want him in my house." I mean, they had me over, and I got to see a Christian household. I got to see, a husband and wife interacting in a godly way, and that was just a huge display of love to me that made an impact on me over the years.
Okay, good. Anna?
I have two, and one is, speaking of joy, one holiday she had several that's over that she knew would be alone, and her and Chloe together cooked a great meal, and we were really moved by that. The other one is in Central Indiana, where my daughter was born. Sister and brother took my boys in and they were 2 and 3, while I delivered Rachel. And I'll just never forget that.
Yeah.
So
those are good examples. They stick out. They stick with you for a long time. Those examples do. Daniel, and then Jenna in the back.
So my memory growing up, being a preacher's kid, we went to a lot of different people's houses, and of course it was the roast and the carrots and those things. But the thing that stuck out to me after this was, other than my mother telling me that I will eat everything they give me, was the people opening up their doors, and that really left an impression upon my life and how I want to be and raise my family and how I want to have other people in my home as well.
Yeah, there's a big impact on us. Eating that's the thing. When you are a preacher's kid or something, you have to eat everything on your plate. Don't embarrass us. Don't even if it's awful, choke it down. Whatever you have to do, And that really, when we went to Bulgaria, that really came out in my mind. Daniel was 7 when I went to Bulgaria for a summer. He was there with his family, and the people invited to your house, and they would serve you food that you'd never had before, and they dipped everything in this nasty yogurt, and you'd go to their houses, and you just have to eat it, and that was the beginning of me trying everything, because I was real picky before that. Jenna, and then we'll move on.
I think one that was formative for me was your dad, Happy Acres, constantly having the whole congregation get together we were so close-knit, that group, and just me growing up around everybody, just the whole congregation getting together all of the time and being a family and loving each other, and a lot of that centered around Happy Acres a lot of the time, and just your dad constantly coming up with things for the young people to do, just crazy stuff, fun stuff. I think that was really formative for me.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, my dad was crazy. He did buy a Happy Acres, about 13 acres, and just made a playground for everybody, and it was just a fun experience for all the kids growing up in that. Of course, it was for my kids, not for me. That's what it is. When you're growing up, your parents are broke and trying to raise you. They don't have money to do all that stuff, but then when you leave, all of a sudden they have money, and then they start doing all this fun stuff, building zip lines and all kinds of crazy things like that. And the grandkids get to experience all the fun stuff. But yeah, that was a very fun time that Dad made some interesting things. So what is hospitality? It's made up of 2 words. It's the words that it's made up of. It's phileo, and the word meaning basically stranger. So to love strangers or to be fond of strangers. And really what I think it boils down to, it comes to everything that Jesus taught and all the examples that he uses. It's treating people, whether you know them or not, the way that God would want you to treat them. And so it does have applications, we'll see, to brothers and sisters that we've been talking about. That's what a lot of our memories. And it has application to people who aren't even Christians, people who are strangers, people that we don't know, that we show kindness to, that we relieve burdens from, or we supply needs of. If we're relieving someone's burdens and we're supplying them needs, we're engaging in hospitality in the broader sense of how that term is used throughout the Bible. And it goes right in line with what Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount, how we're to treat people. In Matthew chapter 5, 43 through 48, he says, you've heard that it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for he makes the sun to rise on the good and the evil, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even tax collectors do the same? Therefore, you shall be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So yes, hospitality does center somewhat around our relationships with other Christians. But there's a greater sense in which our light needs to be seen by those who aren't Christians, and us meeting their needs and relieving their burdens. And sometimes that might be a meal, or it might be providing them with food or any other thing that we can do in this life to help them with the burdens that this life poses. In the New Testament, the word is used just a few times. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 3, it says, a bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. Also, when he's writing to Titus, it's used in that passage as well. Titus chapter 1, 8 through 9, where it says, be hospitable, an elder must be hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught. So the description of elders, shepherds, leaders of the congregation, both include this concept of being hospitable. If you look at Romans chapter 12, I gave you these verses in the questions that I emailed out to you, so hopefully you've had a chance to read them. But Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 9, says this, let love be without hypocrisy. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love and honor, giving preference to one another, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. And then 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 8 says, and above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. As such, one has received a gift, minister it to one another. So you have all these verses here that use this word being hospitable or hospitality. So putting all those verses together, hopefully you had a chance to look at all these and come up with some things on what we can learn from those passages that use the word hospitable. Randy? We need a microphone up here for Randy. Anybody else want to answer this? Raise your hand so we can get a microphone to you.
Yes. Well, what I was going to say, you more or less covered in those verses, but what I was going to say is hospitality presupposes a sense of generosity.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not going to happen without generosity.
Yeah. Hospitality usually will cost you something. All right. It'll usually cost you either money or time, or you're giving up something to be hospitable. So there's got to be some generosity there as well. Brian?
Yeah, the one that jumped out to me was Peter 4:10. Of course, the New American Standard reads a little differently. It says, as each one has received a gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. So I love that idea that, my house is not really mine. It's God's house. That's a gift from the Lord, and He was gracious enough to share that with me. And so I want to be gracious to others and share that with them as well, if I can.
Yeah, I mean, to really be hospitable and eagerly being hospitable, right? To do it with an eagerness about it, not just with grumbling, right? We got to have people over the house. That means, what do we have to do? We have people over the house. You got to clean the house first, right? And the kids don't like the dust and the vacuum and to do all that good stuff. And it just takes time. But when we start viewing things in a sense of, hey, this has been a generous gift of God to me. Whatever we have, I ought to be able to use that for other people. So that, I think generosity and God's grace are at the foundation of this. All right, we have Herb. Anybody else? Raise your hand so we can get a microphone to you.
I love what you're saying about the hospitality was designed initially for strangers, for people we don't know very well or have just met. And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish with House to House. If we're going to go and reach the lost and share our love with others, we can practice it on each other. And same thing goes for hospitality. If you're a little nervous about inviting somebody you don't know in your house, practice it with people you do know. And you're showing love. And then you can practice hospitality with those you don't know as well. And that begins the opportunity to reach the lost and giving of ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I mean, we practice it with one another, and that should go out into practicing it with the people in the world as well. It should reach out past this. And I think there's going to be other verses that we read that note this. One of the things that just impressed me about those verses that we just read is the idea of it's all based upon love. Love is the motivation of it, right? So if we love, so generosity is one of the motivators. Love motivates us to try to bear other people's burdens and meet their needs. I mean, and we're going to have other verses that show that. What kind of people are we if we see people in need and we don't do anything about it, right? We don't do anything to alleviate those needs and those burdens. And it might be a test of our hearts that we're not loving like we should. Another, in Romans chapter 9 and verse 13, it does talk about needs. All right, so that's part of it. And I think sometimes, if we're not careful, if we define hospitality just by being invited over to someone's house for Sunday afternoon dinner to provide them something they really don't need, right? It's just except the social interaction and the building up of relationships, which is important. But the foundation of being hospitable has to do with people needing something, right? And so I think that's an important part of it. We'll see that with some of our other examples. And we do see in Romans 12, it's to the saints. And you go back to the ones about the elders. Who are the elders being hospitable to? Primarily, what is their concern? It's the flock, right? And so they're showing this hospitality to the flock. And so we don't want to get the idea that hospitality, because the definition is love of strangers, is something that is applied only to those who are lost. It is applied to one another first and foremost, and then it is applied to those who are lost. So let's look at some other passages here that I think might be helpful to us as we continue on. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. 1 John chapter 3, 16 and 17. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? And then 1 Timothy chapter 5, 9 through 10, talking about widows who are going to be accepted into where the congregation was taking care of them. It says, do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works. If she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. So the same question again, is what do we learn from those passages about hospitality and living the Christian life? Anything new, anything different? Raise your hand if you have a comment. All right, we have a couple. All right.
I have more of a question. Why is it specifically 60 years old?
Say what?
Why is it specifically at 60?
Oh, you have to read the whole passage there.
Yeah,
There
it's true.
was, I'm not sure why the specific age was that, but there's older widows could be taken in because they're less likely to get married again, and they would need it more than the younger widows. He encourages the younger widows on that particular occasion, go ahead and get married, and so that you'll have family to take care of you. And it's in the passage. He's also saying children need to take care of their parents as well in that passage. Brenda?
Well, the theme through all of this is to be prepared in your mind to be ready for that. And that's something that Dave and I would like to try to work on, because you get busy, you get hung up in life, and then you realize so much time has gone by and you haven't prepared to do something like that. You just try to get through the day or the 24 hours or whatever. We want to be prepared with those skills. And, I'm not sure how much our society supports that in general. Homemaking and being ready to have someone in your home and things like that. So I've had to work on that, in that you are prepared to welcome someone into your home. You're ready, so you don't make that person feel like, oh, this is, you really.
It's a big chore to have you over here.
Oh, it's a big
we had
deal.
to clean the house for you.
So, yeah, and I want to make sure that when someone walks in the door, they're welcome, you speak to them, and try to work on that, because a lot of stuff slips by. I'm like, oh, wished I had done this or that. So being prepared, I'm a big one for lists. So you have a list and you be ready to employ those things. If that makes sense.
It won't happen by accident, right? Because if we don't make plans to be hospitable, unless we just see something in our love in our hearts just automatically meets that need, it won't happen like it should. So you have to be ready. Not everybody is prepared for that. And does the devil want us to do this? No. And so what's he going to do? Every distraction he can possibly throw away, right? Keep us busy with things in life so we don't have time. And that's probably one of our biggest excuses, right? We're too busy. We don't have time. We're too busy. We don't have time. And we probably need to work on that element so we can do some of these other things. I like the idea, again, mercy, filling needs, love. I think there is a danger because of the Galatians passage that it says do good to all men, especially the household of faith. Sometimes we emphasize the household of faith and we don't emphasize the first part of that verse, and I think we need to make sure that we emphasize the first part of that verse as well. The lady who's going to be taken into to be taken care of by the congregation has to have had a character where she showed hospitality, right? She lodged strangers and she was known for doing all kinds of good work. So let's go. Joe.
The flip side of that is that, as we've gone through the last 2 or 3 points, if there is a need and no one fulfills it, then what does that person think about a Christianity? What does that person think about a general congregation? Not just PSD, but in general. Then it's a much harder discussion when you have reached the lost and stuff like that. If you're not hospitable to your own, if you will.
Right. So you're meeting the needs of one another. People see that, and they're impressed by that. I think is a good example, and it helps us meet the needs of others as well. Brian, and then we'll move on.
I don't think I've worked this out completely. It'd be good to maybe do a sermon on this or something, but I think it's good it makes us really uncomfortable to think about hospitality to strangers. Because, there's other passages about wisdom and, be wise, don't be naive, and, we see things on the news about, people getting attacked and all that. So there's always a risk involved, when it's a stranger. But at the same time, faith often involves trusting God in risky situations. So it's not anything that I've solved, but
thanks a lot, Brian.
Yeah, but I really think it's healthy to kind of question ourselves about that. And the reason I brought it up is because this is a widow in 1 Timothy 5. lodging strangers. I mean, if anybody could take advantage of somebody or attack somebody and steal all her stuff, it would be a widow who wouldn't, have the defenses for that. So yet she still did it and still trusted the Lord. So just food for thought to chew on.
Obviously, you need to use wisdom to protect your own safety. And there might be, and one thing that I think hopefully we're seeing and we're going to continue to see is hospitality can be practiced in more ways than having somebody into your home, right? You can practice hospitality by providing another way to meet those needs if there is danger involved in it. So I think you got to consider that as well. Or if there's somebody else who can do that wouldn't pose a danger to you. If we all have the spirit of hospitality, we wouldn't want to put our older members or our widows at risk, because we would want those of us who could take care of that, we'd want to take care of that. So I think all that, Brian's going to work all that for you out in the sermon soon. So that is to be determined later. He will solve all those problems. But before we do that, before he solves those problems, let's go look at Abraham. Genesis chapter 18. All right, so in Genesis chapter 18, we have this story where I think Abraham just shows a great level of hospitality here. Genesis 18 and verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord appeared to him under the tree as they were sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground and said, 'My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please, the little water be brought and wash your feet and rest here under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant.' They said, 'Do as you said.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, 'Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes.' And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to the young men, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them and stood by them under the tree as they ate." So let's read all of these, and then I have the slide of lessons that we can learn. Lot, a similar story. They come, the Lord leads 2 come back. The angels are there. He doesn't know they're angels. Just like Abraham didn't know exactly who he was talking to at the time either. So the 2 angels come down to Sodom. They're in the open square. They have no place to stay. See, there weren't inns. There weren't holiday inns. And there's even a lot of speculation. There may not have been an inn in Bethlehem at the time of Jesus, and that might be a different interpretation of that particular word there. The cities didn't have hotels. Most of them did not. And so if somebody were to come to the town that you were in, they would go to the open square. And it was the townspeople's responsibility then to invite them into their homes and give them a place to live. So that's what Lot does. And in this particular occasion, the angels said, no, we're going to stay out here. And Lot is insistent that, no, you're not safe out here. Come to my house, stay at my house. And we know how all that situation went, and it wasn't great, but he provided them safety to some degree as they lodged in his house. There's another example of this as well, and in Judges chapter 19. This is an old man. There's a man who comes through town with his concubine. They come into the city and no one takes him in. All right, so he's sitting out the whole day. He has no place for his animals. He has no place to stay that night. And so this older man comes in and he says, "Where are you going and where are you from?" Verse 18, so he said, "And we are passing from Bethlehem to Judah, toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah. Now I am going to the house of the Lord, and there is no one to take me into his house. Although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself, and for your female servant, and for the young man who is with your servant. There is no lack of anything." So he says, look, I'm here. The tradition is that people would take a stranger in and feed him and house him and take care of his animals. He said, I don't even need all that. I have food for my animals. I have food for myself. I just need a place to stay, and nobody in the city is providing this for me. And the old man said, "Peace be with you. However, let all your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square." So he brought him into the house. He gave fodder to his donkeys, and they washed their feet, and they ate, and they drank. So here you have another example of meeting needs, taking away burdens, meeting needs. The early Christians, we've looked at this before in this particular class, but in Acts chapter 2, you had some Christians who had come to town for the Passover, Pentecost. They stayed because of what was taking place. They didn't have the basic necessities of life. And so they were, Acts chapter 2 and verse 42, they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship and the breaking of bread and in prayers. Fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Most of us probably know the story of the Good Samaritan, right? And this sort of branches it out a little bit. So you have the priest and the Levite go by. They see this guy who's been beaten up on the side of the road. He had needs, right? He had immediate needs. He was beaten up on the side of the road. They both pass around on the other side. They don't take care of his needs. Then you have a Samaritan comes by. He sees this guy who's in desperate need. And what does he do for this guy? He bandages him up. He pours oil on his wounds. He puts him on his donkey. He takes him to an inn, pays for him to stay there and have extended care taken, and tells the innkeeper, anything else I'll give you when I come back. I'll take care of this guy's needs. So there's a financial responsibility that he takes on. He does, on this particular occasion, he doesn't take them back home with him. He goes and takes them, puts them up someplace, and has somebody else take care of him, because that made the most sense at the time under that circumstance. So given these examples that we have of hospitality, what lessons did you learn as you were reading these lessons this week, or that you stuck out as we were just reading them together? What sticks out? Okay, Randy has something up here. Somebody else raise your hand so we get a microphone to you. There's lots of good things in these passages. All right, Chloe's got her hand raised.
Yeah, I think we can fall into a trap, until recent times, like basically the beginning of the 20th century, most people were just, throughout history, just brutally poor. And I think they were more attuned to the needs of people than we are. It's so easy for us to fall into the trap that everybody's like us. They got a car, they got a job, they got food to eat, and we forget some people, maybe by no fault of their own, are in dire straits at that moment.
I think prosperity is one hindrance to us practicing hospitality, because we don't see people on a regular basis who have immediate needs that need to be met, and we're comfortable in our own lives. And so that I think hospitality, and plus, most of us who are members here, been members here for years, don't have any problems providing food for themselves. Right? Most of us have a place to live. We have cars to drive. And so because there's been increased prosperity in our nation, there has been a lack of need for us to fill. And so I think that is a danger for us to get into that trap. I think that might be changing. It might change even more as we continue on. Chloe.
I think, like the people who pass the man laying in the street, we need to not think we need to not have arrogance and pride. We're not better than anybody else. So, if you see somebody struggling, I think, when I see somebody struggling on the side of the road, the temptation might be, oh, I could give them stuff, but I don't know how they're going to spend it. Or I don't know how they're going to use it. And I heard something one time that was really helpful. And it was like, if I have the means to give them something, then I'm going to. I'm not in charge of what they do with it after I give it to them, but I am in charge of whether or not I give something if somebody needs it. And I just, that really stuck with me, to not judge motives and then not think you're better than somebody who's struggling.
Yeah, good points. It's always hard to meet that balance, and who you help, how you help, and all that good stuff. Anna.
We're in sad times right now, gas. food going up. There may be some brethren here that need help in that area. Whether, you give them a Publix card or a gas card or whatever so they can choose their needs. And it's just a good time to be brotherly at that.
That's a good thought. We know somebody who might be having a hard time with gas deals. Give them a gas card so they don't have to worry about that. The gas has risen so much lately. Terry.
I wonder how many people pass by the old man in the square and pass by, the gentleman in the Good Samaritan story and said, well, someone else will take care of it. And it's so easy for us to say, well, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people to do that. I don't need to do that. And we all need to step up and not think, not have that mindset.
Yeah, it's easy to shift. Somebody else is going to do that. That's somebody, and the government hasn't helped either, right? Because with all the social programs out there, it's almost like that's really who should be doing this. I mean, even with our parents, the main responsibility for parents are kids, right? It's not the government, and because we have all of these, we have a tendency of saying, I pay my taxes, the government should do that, right? And so that is something that we have to watch out for. We have to be willing to step it up. One of the things, and I'll just try to make sure that we're looking at some of these examples that we've noted. How eager was Abraham to help?
Very.
Did you get the impression when you read that? I mean, he says he saw these guys and he runs out to them. And he's like, yeah, please come to my house. He puts them on and what did he provide for them? Do you notice all the things he provided for them?
Best.
The best, right? He goes out and kills a fatted calf. And those fatted calves, I mean, a lot of times, those were saved for special occasions. You were fattening up a calf, you were going to use it for some special occasion, and to him, this is a special occasion. So, in other words, I'll tell you one more thing about my dad when I was a kid that I do remember about his hospitality. He would have people over, when we had people over the house, and then Jenna's dad will have fond memories of this. My dad, a lot of times, would make T-bone steaks in porterhouses. He'd go to the meat market, was like a mile from the house, and they had fresh meat. And so that was what Abraham was doing. He was providing the best, the fine flour, right? Get the good stuff out for our company. And I think the Tokashes were making fun of us when we first moved here because we have fine china that we've never used. We only used it a few times. We've used it a few times. It's been in boxes. But it's almost like have people over your house and how special they would feel if you laid out the table with your fine china, right? And the silverware that doesn't go in the dishwasher, right? Not allowed to go on. You had to hand wash these things. And it's showing to people that you are a guest. I'm giving you the best that I have because I love God and you're one of His, and so I'm going to give you the best that I have. And I think it's nothing wrong with having people over for hot dogs, roasting them out. Those are all fun. I love hot dogs, right? But there's also nothing wrong with having people over and treating them special and giving them food that they may not get other places and other times. Taking somebody, and people have done this to us so many times that we're so thankful for, taking us to restaurants that we wouldn't normally go ourselves, right? Only special occasion restaurants. When we first got married, people took us to these nice restaurants all the time, and we were like, order whatever you want. We're like, oh, okay. And are you sure about this? Because what I want costs a lot of money. But, and there's people here that are very good at that as well, taking people out to nicer restaurants and footing the bill. All right, Cindy needs a microphone. We have Brian. Our microphones are out right now. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and you also see, you never know what benefit God might bring about through your act of hospitality. The benefit to you. Yes. And now I understand we're not supposed to do it just so we get a benefit, but what if Abraham just ignored those angels? Instead, though, he shows the hospitality, and they give him that promise about his son and all that. So sometimes there are unexpected things that happen that you never saw coming. Was actually very beneficial for that situation.
And the angels are the ones that took Lot and his family by the hands and said, hey, no more goofing off here. We got to get out of town. The destruction is coming. Yes, ma'am.
Well, since you mentioned steak, I did have a student's parents make me a steak one time that was fabulous. But anyway, I was going to say, if I can remember now, sorry. Students. So being in a school system, I do see that there is a lot of need that sometimes is unseen. So I think even within the congregation, as well as just in the world, there's a lot of either we're blind to it or we just don't look for it. But I think there is a lot of need that's out there that can be addressed. And I know as a
No
school,
doubt.
we try to do that with our student families that are needed. And I think that's a really good thing. And then I kind of have a question too, if I may.
Okay.
So in regards to, this just kind of went through my mind as we've been having the discussions, but maybe different category, but talking about bearing one another's burdens and loving one another, could prayer even be considered hospitality in that way? Because I pray for people to help bear their burdens through asking the Lord to help them as I'm trying to be there for them with my heart. But I don't know, I just wondered if it's kind of separate categories, you could kind of consider it similar, you know?
It might fit under the umbrella of hospitality, but it definitely fits under this bigger umbrella that we're talking about as loving one another and meeting one another's needs and doing what God wants us to do for one another. So it's a very, very important part of that. So yeah, praying for one another is huge. Cindy?
I was just going to kind of give an example of reaching out to someone. I used to work downtown in Orlando in a law firm, and so I'd go out every day at the courtyard on Court Street, and they would have like tables where you could sit and all. And my sister and I were sitting out there one day, and this young girl, she was a little bit younger than Chloe, and she was going through the garbage cans trying to find something to eat. And that moved my sister and I so much that, you know, we went and bought her meal. And then other times there were two men that we kind of befriended. They were street people, but they became really good friends with us, even though we lived different lives. But we were able to share God's hospitality and God's love to them. And it's just, there are great benefits from being hospitable.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
to strangers,
We
especially
do-
to strangers.
Yeah, we do benefit from it ourselves as well. I mean, the purpose of doing it is because we're motivated out of love for them. We bear their burdens, meet their needs. When we do that, we're being hospitable, whether it's giving a gas card or a Publix card or praying for somebody or taking them out to a dinner or whatever the case may be. Those are all ways that we can reflect God's love for one another and for them, right? That's what really all we're trying to do is we're trying to show other people that God loves them too, right? And God wants to have a relationship with them, and He wants to be hospitable to you. He wants to bear your real burdens that I can't bear. I can't bear your burden of sin. I can't take that away from you, but I know someone who has taken my sins away. And so those are all things that we need to consider as we I deal with this idea of hospitality. Jenna?
Back to Abraham for a second. I always thought it's interesting that he doesn't tell them that I'm killing the fatted calf for you. He says, "Oh, just come for a morsel of bread." And he's being humble. He's not drawing attention to the fact that I'm preparing this great feast for you. That's what he does because it's important enough to him. Their being there is important enough to him for him to give his best, but he's not trying to impress them in what he's doing. He's not trying to be all grandiose about it. He's just, come for a morsel.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah, Abraham was very wealthy at this point, right? He and Lot have already separated. Lot's already in Sodom, and so they separated because they were wealthy. And they couldn't. So he is very wealthy. He has all kinds of things at his disposal. And the other thing I love about that story is that they stayed for a while. I mean, I don't know. I mean, to do the fine flour, to make the cakes. This was an elongated visit because they killed a calf and prepared the calf. That doesn't, it's not like going to your refrigerator and pulling out the steaks and throwing them on a grill that's already preheated, right? This is a long process, and he was. And so sometimes the time that we give up when we have people over is also important. And I think Abraham did that. Chloe, and then that'll be it for us.
I think you have to remember also that you want to help people, but you also need to remember, like, you're doing everything to the glory of God. So, how does that look if you don't help somebody? I was somewhere where a Christian, like one of those table merchandise Christians, wanted me to like stop and like donate to whatever. And I was like, no, thank you, have a good day. And then I fell and a bunch of like strangers came up, but what didn't happen is the people who called themselves Christians didn't bother helping. And so I think you have to remember, like, yes, it might take more time out of your day. Yes, it, XYZ, but at the end, like, you're doing this because you're showing God's light to people.
Exactly. Everything's done for God's glory, right? Everything that we do is not to shine the light on ourselves, it's to shine the light on God and to let people know that, hey, I'm being hospitable to you in a physical sense. I know the one who can be hospitable to you in a spiritual sense and bear your burdens and meet all your spiritual needs. We're going to continue this on Wednesday. We only have Wednesday and Sunday left, and then we're done with this particular book.